On the morning of August 31st, 2003, the lifeless body of 22-year-old Katie Sepich was found near a remote landfill in the desert of Las Cruces, New Mexico. The last time her friends had seen her, she was leaving a house party. It took nearly 4 years to identify her killer. Katie's mother described her as a candid, cheerful, and intelligent girl. She grew up in Carlsbad, New Mexico, and was the eldest child in the family. Katie graduated from New Mexico State University with a degree in business and was planning to pursue a master's degree in business administration. She worked as a waitress at a local Mexican restaurant. Katie was a very sociable person. While studying at the university, she met a guy named Joe Bishop. Their friendly relationship quickly grew into something more romantic. Katie told her mother Jay that she was happy with Joe. She wanted to build a future with him, and a few months later, she realized her dream could come true when Joe gave her a diamond ring. In the summer of 2003, when Katie and Joe graduated from university, they faced difficulties in their relationship. Katie decided to continue her studies at the university, and Joe returned to his parents in Gallup, New Mexico, a small town about 350 miles from Las Cruces. Katie was very upset that Joe had to leave. The long-distance relationship was unbearable, but they still managed to meet occasionally. During the Labor Day weekend in 2003, Joe came to Las Cruces, and Katie was over the moon. However, the weekend they spent together turned into a tragedy. On Saturday, August 30th, 2003, Katie had a great time with Joe and their friends, moving from one bar to another before reaching a local party, after which Katie disappeared. The next day, Katie's mom Jay answered a phone call that forever changed her life. Veronica, Katie's roommate, told Jay that her daughter had left the party alone that night. Veronica and Joe had fallen asleep at the house where the party was held. They thought Katie had gone home, but in the morning, it turned out that she was nowhere to be found. Her family contacted the police and reported her missing. At about the same time, someone discovered a semi-naked female body near a landfill in the desert. There were no documents near the body, but seeing the external signs, the police who arrived at the scene concluded that the body had been there for no more than a day. It immediately became clear that the victim's death was not the result of an accident. She appeared to be about 20 to 25 years old. She was naked below the waist, which made the motive for this crime obvious. There were signs of self-defense on her arms. She had fought for her life, scratching the person who attacked her. She had particles of the criminal's skin under her nails. Thus, the police had a DNA sample of the person who took her life. There were signs of strangulation on her neck, and at first glance, this seemed to be the most likely cause of death. Investigators did not notice any signs of a struggle near the body, which allowed them to conclude that this girl had died somewhere else. Obviously, the perpetrator had moved the body to a remote landfill in the desert, hoping it would take people a long time to find her. Something else shocking was found on the victim's body: signs of burns on her hands and back. This indicated that the perpetrator had tried to get rid of the body or destroy evidence and set the victim on fire. The police quickly made a connection between Katie's disappearance and the body of the girl found. Katie's father went to the morgue to identify the body. The residents of the once peaceful Las Cruces were frightened. What had happened to Katie was horrible. The police did everything possible to find the perpetrator as soon as possible because there was no guarantee that this person would not commit a new crime. When the police began investigating Katie's case, they wanted to know as much as possible about the last hours of her life. Where she had been, with whom, what she had been doing, whether she had quarreled with anyone, and whether she had any enemies. The distance between the place where the party was held and the house where Katie lived was about a mile. So the police needed to find out whether she had made it to her home or not. The first thing the investigators did was talk to Veronica, her roommate, and Joe, her boyfriend. They found it strange that these two had stayed at the party while Katie had gone home alone in the middle of the night. Joe showed no desire to cooperate with the police. He said that Katie had left, leaving her purse, phone, and keys behind. Detectives began studying Katie's route. They went from door to door and interviewed residents, hoping to get clues from them. But, unfortunately, it did not help. No one had seen or heard anything. One finding led to the assumption that Katie had made it to her home but never went inside, as she had left without her keys. Investigators searched the house and the surrounding area and found Katie's shoes under the window of her bedroom. Apparently, she had wanted to climb into the house through the window, and at that moment, someone had attacked her. This was also indicated by the tracks on the gravel near the house. Katie had fought for her life, but unfortunately, the perpetrator had been stronger. Investigators suggested that after he had taken Katie's life, the perpetrator had taken her to the landfill in the desert and tried to set her on fire. They began to wonder if it was a stranger or someone she knew and trusted. There were about 40 people at that party. Perhaps someone had followed Katie as she was returning home and attacked her. Could that person have been her boyfriend? Investigators wanted to find answers to these questions. They interviewed everyone who had been at that party and discovered one important detail that Joe had not mentioned. Several witnesses reported that Katie had seen Joe kissing another girl. Later, they saw the couple arguing. That was the reason why Katie had gone home alone and forgotten her purse. She had been angry and wanted to leave that place as soon as possible. However, when the police interrogated Joe the first time, he said nothing about it. He also said nothing to her parents, who wanted to know why their daughter had left the party alone. Investigators interrogated Joe again. They told him they knew that he and Katie had argued because she had seen him kissing another girl, and Joe admitted that it was true. According to him, when Katie went home, he followed her in his car. Supposedly, Joe drove up to her house but did not go inside. He saw that the light in her room was off and thought she was already asleep, so he returned to the party. Thus, it turned out that Joe was not at the party at the time Katie was attacked. None of those the investigator spoke to could say with certainty when Joe returned. Probably, he had time to commit the crime, then take Katie's lifeless body to the desert and return to the party. After interviewing those present at the event, investigators discovered another strange detail. When he returned to the party, Joe began calling Katie on her cell phone, which was in her purse. When the phone rang, the guy saw it. He realized that Katie had forgotten it, but for some reason, he continued to call her until morning. Perhaps in this way, he was trying to provide himself with an alibi and wanted to show that he was worried about his beloved. Investigators wanted Joe to explain his strange behavior, but he refused to talk. Katie loved Joe very much, but he did not even come to her funeral, which raised even more suspicion. All the investigators needed to exclude Joe from the list of potential suspects was a sample of his DNA. Experts found DNA samples on Katie's body in 3 different places. Most of it was under her nails. All the samples found belonged to the same person. The police wanted to compare Joe's DNA with the DNA found on Katie's body, but there were problems with that. Joe had left town. His parents hired a lawyer who reported that Joe refused to provide his DNA sample. Looking at the guy's behavior, no one had any doubt that he had something to hide and that he had something to do with Katie's death. The police needed to find a legal way to obtain his DNA, but it took time. At the same time, investigators were considering other versions. They studied similar cases, trying to find out if Katie was the only victim of the one who took her life. The DNA samples found on her body were checked against the national database, but there were no matches. Investigators decided to go back to where it all started, to the party. They identified all the men who had been at that party and asked them to provide DNA samples. All the men agreed because they had nothing to hide. However, no matches were found on Katie's body with the DNA, and this brought the investigators back to Joe. He was the only one who had refused to provide his DNA, but investigators found another way to get it. They found out that, before going to the party, Katie and Joe had spent some time in her bedroom, where they had had intimate contact. The police came to the house and took the sheet from Katie's bed, thinking they would find Joe's DNA there, and they were right. The lab did find a sample of male DNA, but it did not match the one found on Katie's body. This meant that Joe was not the one who had attacked her. Then why had he refused to cooperate with the police if he was not involved in what had happened to his girlfriend? The police sent the test results to Joe's lawyer. After learning that he had been excluded from the list of suspects, Joe decided to contact the police and provide a sample of his DNA. A new test confirmed the initial result of Joe's non-involvement in this crime. When asked to explain his refusal to cooperate with the police, Joe said that he and Katie had had intimate contact before the party, so he was afraid that they would find his DNA on her body. As for Joe's behavior on the night of Katie's death, it remained a mystery to the police and her family. After Joe was excluded from the list of suspects, the police had to look for other versions. Several people at the party told investigators that Katie had rings on her fingers that evening, including the one Joe had given her. However, when Katie's body was found, there were no rings on her fingers. The police believed that they had been removed by the person who had taken her life. They went around all the pawn shops in the county but never found Katie's jewelry. Another potential clue was the tire tracks near the place where Katie's body was found. Experts managed to establish the brand and model of the tires. The manufacturer told the police that such tires were most often put on pickups. Unfortunately, this did not help get closer to catching the perpetrator, and the case came to a standstill. About a year later, in Wisconsin, someone committed a crime very similar to what had happened to Katie. Someone attacked a girl in Green Bay and did the same to her. The victim was also set on fire, but fortunately, she survived. She told the police that she had pretended to be dead, and that was the only reason she had managed to survive. When the perpetrators left, she extinguished the fire and went to a neighboring house for help. She said that 2 Latino men had attacked her, but in Katie's case, all the evidence pointed to only one person. The police had to check the DNA analysis to confirm or exclude the connection between these 2 crimes. The victim from Wisconsin described the appearance of the men who had attacked her in detail to the police. When the Green Bay police published these sketches, one of the farmers recognized his workers, Gregorio Morales and Juan Nieto. In them, one of them had relatives in Las Cruces and often visited them. Both men were arrested. The police investigating Katie's case believed they had finally found the perpetrators, but the DNA test results proved otherwise. The samples did not match the DNA found on Katie's body. These 2 men were later convicted of the assault on the girl in Green Bay, but they were not connected to Katie's case. Nieto was sentenced to 70 years in prison, and Morales to 50 years. Thus, the investigators reached another dead end. The only evidence the police had was the tire tracks from the crime scene and samples of the perpetrator's DNA. Katie's family hoped that the DNA analysis would allow the police to identify the person who had taken their daughter's life, but there were problems with that. Taking a DNA sample from anyone arrested by the police was illegal. On December 18, 2006, 3.5 years after Katie's death, there was a breakthrough in the case. The lab found a DNA sample that matched the DNA found on Katie's body. The man who had attacked Katie was 26-year-old Gabriel Avila. He was not acquainted with Katie. He had an extensive criminal past and had been released from prison shortly before Katie's death. On November 13, 2003, less than 3 months after Katie's brutal murder, Avila was arrested for breaking into the apartment of 2 young women with a knife. The college roommates avoided the attack by locking themselves in the bathroom and calling 911. In March 2004, he was found guilty of committing an aggravated crime. However, according to the data, when he was released on bail, Avila escaped. He could have been arrested just 3 months after attacking Katie, but due to the imperfection of the system, His connection to Katie's death was established only 3.5 years later. The fugitive hid from the police for almost a year before being detained in November 2004 on a tip. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. When entering prison, a DNA sample was taken from Avila, but it took another 2 years to conduct the analysis. When the results showed a partial match with the DNA taken from the place where Katie's body was found, investigators took action and quickly discovered the truck in which Avila had dumped the body. On the center console, they found a ring belonging to Katie. This case showed that the system needed to be changed. The police had spent resources and time searching for the perpetrator for 3 years, but Avila could have been arrested much earlier if the police had taken a DNA sample from him during his first arrest. It is also surprising that his DNA sample was tested only 2 years later, in 2006. The detectives conducting Katie's investigation went to the prison to talk to Avila. Seeing Katie's ring that had been found in his pickup truck, he admitted that he had committed the crime. He said that on that evening, he had been in the area to buy prohibited substances while his wife was not at home. That was when he saw Katie and asked if she needed a ride. She said no. Then he saw her again in front of the house. Katie wanted to get into her bedroom through the window, but Avila attacked her and started undressing her. After that, Avila did not know what to do and decided to strangle Katie. He was afraid that later she would identify him. Then he loaded Katie's body into his pickup truck and took it to the landfill in the desert, where he threw her body on the ground. He decided to set her body on fire to destroy all the evidence but was mistaken. Avila's DNA sample was taken again, and it showed a match. When traces of DNA were found on Katie's body in 2003, her parents hoped it would lead to a quick investigation. But in New Mexico and almost all other states, it was illegal to take a DNA test during an arrest. DNA was entered into the system only if someone was convicted and sent to prison. This triggered a nationwide campaign, led by Katie's parents, to pass a law named after their daughter in all 50 states, requiring anyone arrested for a violent crime to submit a DNA sample, after which it would be added to the National CODIS database. In 2006, Katie's bill was passed by the New Mexico state legislature, with only 5 votes against, and went into effect in March 2006. Thanks to the tireless efforts of Katie's parents, in 2010, this became federal law, and now more than 31 states have a law similar to Katie's law in New Mexico. David, Katie's father, said that his greatest fear was that someone else would have to die at the hands of his daughter's killer. But now he can get rid of that fear. Some opponents argue that this policy is an invasion of privacy and a violation of civil rights. Others comment that since DNA contains confidential information, collecting samples and including them in the National DNA database before a conviction does not violate constitutional rights. Gabriel Avila's trial began in 2007. He apologized to Katie's family. His lawyer urged the judge to show leniency and said that Avila regretted what he had done. District Attorney Susana Martinez argued that Avila had waited more than 3 years after the murder to confess and did so only after detectives presented him with evidence of DNA analysis. When passing the sentence, Katie's father, David, urged the judge not to be lenient in punishment. In May 2007, Gabriel Avila was found guilty and sentenced to 69 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole around 2043. After serving a 30-year sentence. Jayanne, Katie's mother, vowed that she and her husband would continue to work to have Katie's law passed in all 50 states in honor of their daughter.